and good morning to this Pareshat Emor is what we're going to be discussing today. We do thank you for joining on this Zoom meeting. We're going to do things a little bit different, not very different, a little bit different, because usually when we have a Parsha class, we're going to start with the Parsha itself, right? We're going to turn to the Parsha, and we're going to read a few verses, and after we read the verses, we're going to go ahead and try to have a deeper understanding of the message or the text itself, or what it represents, or what it means, or what the commentators have to say. Today, we're going to actually start off with a section of Talmud. And it's an interesting section of Talmud because it's a section of Talmud that is critical of a rabbi. It's critical of a rabbi. And this is something that's unique about our text, that here you have the foundation of Jewish thought, of Jewish philosophy, of Jewish practices, that basically encourages the Jewish person to turn to the rabbis for guidance, because there's an understanding that it is those who put time and effort and energy into the Limud Torah, right? It is those who we should be respecting, because after all, they are our teachers. Nevertheless, the Talmud feels comfortable being critical of rabbis. Okay, and here we go. It's going to be a section of the Talmud that's going to be critical of a rabbi. So if you do have it, I did send it out. It's in the Talmud Masechet Ta'anit Daf Chaf, page 20. So I emailed it out. If you don't have that email, that's fine, because I'm going to read the story and translate it. Those who did get it as an attachment yesterday and the day before, you could follow the Hebrew or the English. So before we are starting Parshat Emor, we're going to turn to a section in the Talmud. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Le'olam yehe adam rach kekaneh ve'al yehe kashe ka'eres. So statement number one is that a person should be soft like a reed and don't be stiff like a cedar. The cedar, Erez Balvanon, right? It's always the symbol of greatness, of an impressive tree, which sometimes is also a symbol of haughtiness. I have a lot to offer. I am your cedar. The reed, on the other hand, is not an impressive. It doesn't have those impressive elements that the cedar would have, but nevertheless, the rabbis focus on the fact that the reed is flexible, it's soft, and humility at times is to be flexible, not to stand on your principle, but if you're dealing with a stubborn individual, you move aside and let them pass. The reed could outstand the wind, which at times the cedar cannot. This is what we are told. So this is the story the Talmud is going to be focusing on. The Talmud is going to be talking about a story of a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Elazar bar Rabbi Shimon. So for us, it's going to be a story about Rabbi Elazar, who came back from his yeshiva in a place called Migdal Gedor. Migdal Gedor. Now keep those names in mind. A migdal, a tower, and gador, like a gader, an offense. What was he doing in Migdal Gadol? He was studying Torah by his rabbo, by his master. Fine. Haya rachuv al chamor. He was riding his donkey. Umetayel al sfat hanahar. And he was riding and strolling on the bank of the river. That's something that seems relaxing to be outdoors. I don't know about the donkey ride, but being on the bank of a river sounds nice. And what happened was, he was sameach simcha gdola. He was extremely happy. He was uplifted spiritually. to go ahead and study Torah and then in turn to get out and see the beauty of nature. I think that is uplifting. However, the problem is, V'haita da'ato gasa alav, he became, unfortunately, a little bit too proud, right? He was swollen with pride because he studied so much Torah. So this is already a problem, too much pride. Now, and here comes the tragedy. We are told, Nizdamen lo adam echad shehaya mechoar biyoter. Suddenly, a person who is extremely mechoar, something that, as you are learning Hebrew, please don't use that word when you meet someone, because he meets an ugly person. So now the ugly person says hello to him. Amar lo shalom alecha Rabbi. So the ugly fellow turns to him and says, hello, master. Velo hichzir lo. But Rabbi Elazar did not respond. So the fellow who is labeled as ugly in the Talmud, Amar lo reka, you empty person, right? Or, excuse me, Amar lo, so Rabbi Elazar says to the individual, Kama mechuar oto aish, boy, you fellow, you are an empty person and ugly. Did you just hear what a rabbi, quote unquote, a rabbi who studies Torah, turns to an individual who he doesn't know, and he calls him, you empty fellow, you reka, and you are extremely mechoar, you are ugly. And then he asks him, Shema kol bnei irecha mechoarim kamotcha, perhaps all the inhabitants of your town are as ugly as you are. So the fellow responds, Amar lo eini yodea. So the fellow says, listen, I don't know, the ugly fellow says. However, if you have an issue with how I look, lech ve'amor, go ahead and complain, la'uman, to the craftsman, she'asani, kama mechoar kli ze she'asita. If you have an issue, complain to the maker. It is the maker who made me ugly. Now, once Rabbi Elazar hears that, he realized that he made a mistake. Yarad mina chamor nishtatech lefanav. He asked for forgiveness, and the fellow was not willing to forgive. The Talmud shares with us the complete story that eventually he recognized that he's a Torah scholar and he accepts the forgiveness of the individual. You are welcome to look through the rest of the story, but I personally am asking a very basic question. What is wrong with this Rabbi Elazar bar Rabbi Shimon? And this is an odd story because in our tradition, we always talk about the beauty of Torah, and Torah makes you one who is sensitive to others. You become a pleasant person when you study Torah. You learn how to interact with society. And here we have this Rabbi Elazar that does what? Rabbi Elazar meets someone who is physically ugly, and he says, boy, you're an ugly dude, right? Something's wrong with the story, and we need to have some clarity. There has to be a level of clarity, and I give credit to the Talmudic authorities for not editing that story out. And the reason they didn't edit out is because they want us to analyze it and learn something from it. So that's what we're going to try to do today. Learn something from this story that is mentioned in the Talmud. And we're going to use Pareshat Emor, our parasha, to appreciate the message of the story. Okay, so that's what we're going to be doing. And now if you do have a Chumash, you can turn to Pareshat Emor. And if you don't, you could tune in to Pareshat Emor. Pareshat Emor is really a text that relates to the Kohanim. And it also points out that there are some Kohanim who are not qualified to serve in the temple. They have their own role, but the communal public service in the temple cannot be performed by some Kohanim. Other services are going to exclude more than just some. And that's what we're going to go ahead and analyze here. So the Torah tells us, number one, Moshe communicates to the Kohanim that you should know the first area and the first flaw that will disqualify a Kohen is if he is tameh, if he is impure. Okay? And therefore, the Kohen has the obligation not to become tameh. Lenefesh lo yitameh be'amav. If there's a corpse, if there's a funeral, or an entry into the cemetery, should not be done by the Kohen. Why? Well, you could claim it's a decree of the Torah, but it obviously symbolizes something. And in the past, we've discussed that the Kohen is there to inspire us and to teach us that there is value in life. That although our Judaism talks a lot about Olam Haba, the world to come, and although our Judaism often addresses the fact that we have a neshama, that we have a soul, and that soul lives on, and it enters into a different realm after 120, although we talk about that, it is important to remember that life has value. And therefore, value what you see in this world, appreciate this world, use it right? And be, if the whole purpose of existence would just be to place you somewhere in a prosdor, in the words of Mishnah Navot, to just in this hallway, and the real goal is just to reach that destination called Olam Haba, this world would not be so fancy and would not be so beautiful, and there would not be birds of so many varieties, and nature would not be beautiful. It is all incredible because God wants you to realize that there's magnificence, beauty, purpose, and you are to be inspired by the world and inspired by life and value life, right? When we talk a lot about Kiddush Hashem, yes, there's in our literature, you'll find a lot about people who died al Kiddush Hashem, but let's focus on living a life of Kiddush Hashem, where we live our life based on our values with an appreciation. The Kohen is there to teach you that. And since the Kohen is there to teach you that, he needs to be detached from death, and therefore he avoids the tumah that is the byproduct of death, and therefore the Kohen does not enter into the chapel at a funeral, unless, of course, it's one of his close relatives. Then there's an understanding that you cannot demand from him something that is too overwhelming emotionally. But in general, Kohen avoids death because death is not what he's about. He's about teaching you about the value of life. And it's no coincidence that in this Pareshat Emor, towards the end, we have the Chagim. And the Chagim are about celebrating this world. The Chagim, Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, relates to the seasons. And it relates to this concept of appreciating the world. And God wants you, by the way, on the Chagim to have fresh food. It's not like Shabbat that you're supposed to eat your cholent from the day before. It is a day that you are supposed to have fresh food because God wants you to appreciate what this incredible world offers. And therefore, the halacha tells us that on the Chag, you're supposed to leave shul early, meaning the service on a Yom Tov is not supposed to be long because the focus is supposed to be obviously the study of Torah, but at the same time, it's supposed to be about preparing good food. So, Chagim are about life, Kohanim are about life. That's what we find in this week's Parsha. That's one area about what Kohen represents. However, what we're going to move on to is one of the areas that the Torah focuses on in the second paragraph of Pareshat Emor, is that the Kohanim cannot perform service in the Bet HaMikdash if they have a mum. A mum. What is a mum? A physical blemish. And a list of such blemishes are presented here. It either could be some kind of skin condition or an eye blemish or a broken arm. And there are other blemishes that are listed here if you're interested in going through all of them with your medical textbooks. But a blemished Kohen is not to perform service. That doesn't mean that they are completely excluded from anything taking place in the temple. That's not true. But the public service, the ones that would be taking place on the altar, where others would be observing and be inspired, those things were not an area where the blemished Kohen can perform. And this is something that's a little bit, or at least it should be difficult for us to understand. We are a religion of inclusion. We are a religion that's sensitive to those who have limitations. We are a religion that focuses on the fact that if there's a yatom, almanah, there are those who are in need, you go ahead and show them that you're concerned for them. And to go ahead and take someone with a disability and claim that you cannot perform a service, which is what the text tells us, obviously needs clarification. It sounds very un-Jewish, right? To go ahead and look at something external and determine that the fellow is not qualified because of it, we shouldn't be comfortable with it. So we're going to try to understand perhaps why. So one approach would be, there was a president of the United States by the name of Franklin Roosevelt. You've heard of Franklin Roosevelt, of course. The Jews liked him. The Jews loved him until they realized that that he wasn't too much concerned for what was taking place in the concentration camps. And there are records about it. There's a book I read recently about Hillel Cook, known as Peter Bergson, who was pushing in the United States that there should be more done to save the Jews. And he was pushing very hard in 1942, 1943. And Roosevelt was not exactly the big tzaddik that the Jews felt he was in 1944. I remember reading in the Pardes. Pardes was a rabbinic publication. So in the Pardes of 1944, close to November 1944, it was in Yiddish that Jews have a chiyuv, an obligation to vote for Roosevelt, because he's so good to the Jews. And that's what they thought. They used to say, the joke was that Jews only have die Welt, jene Welt, and Roosevelt. They have this world, next world, and Roosevelt. That was the attitude they had. So FDR had a disability. He suffered, he contracted polio, and he was bound to a wheelchair. Now, Roosevelt tried very, very hard to conceal it. And actually, he got assistance from the press corps, from the media. Believe it or not, the media in the 1930s knew very well of the fact that he couldn't walk, and he had these braces that he would use for a few steps, and they would film it, and that was him walking. But the fact that he was really bound to a wheelchair was known, but they kept it quiet. And there was a feeling that if you want to go ahead and have a strong leader, it was important for his image that he could, that has nothing that limits him, that he has nothing that is preventing him from living the fullest. It's interesting that in the 1990s, when they established a memorial for him, so in the memorial, it was a statue of him, but it was in a wheelchair. There was a big to-do in the United States if this is kosher or not, because he tried to conceal it. Are we revealing it? Now, what is relevant for us is the fact that, and perhaps, the image of a leader is one that is not based on what should be, but is based on what people perceive. And if for people it is more appealing to look at someone that does not have a disability, you take that into consideration. Okay? That's perhaps an understanding and why a very basic, right, a very shallow explanation, but perhaps the Torah is telling us the following. When you have some disability, you're not limited at all. What you could achieve with the disability, right, what you could achieve indicates your greatness, right? And we know very well, and someone in our community that has a disability that is achieving much, much more than 99.999% in society. Why? Because Judaism understands that accomplishment is not running a marathon, but what you do with your behavior, with your mind, with your mouth, and how you communicate with others, and what you consider important, that defines you, not your ability to run and jump, right? Running and jumping could be done also by kangaroos. Humans have more to achieve than just with their physical body. But nevertheless, people look at leaders and they want to have something that is pleasant to them, right? It's no coincidence that when it comes to the old days, when you would watch the news at 6:30 p.m. Remember those days 40 years ago? When you would turn to Walter Cronkite, or later on to Dan Rather. So obviously, if it was someone that physically was not appealing, you might go to the other channel. Human nature, not that it's an ideal, but it's a reality. So that's perhaps one explanation how we could understand the idea of the mum, that when there's a blemish, the Kohen cannot perform the public service. Perhaps. But then there's another explanation that's given, and that is, if you look at Torah, the Torah often focuses on the fact that the imahot were beautiful. Well, that's what we're told. And if you look at Talmudic literature likes talking about the fact that there was a lot of physical beauty with the matriarchs. Now, I ask you, is that really what's important in Judaism? I mean, physical beauty, is that really what defines a person? Do we need to go through the list of flawed people in Hollywood that were indeed very beautiful physically, but as a person are the most disgusting than all? And I think we could all think of incredible people that might not be considered, ones that you would put on the cover of a magazine, but their beauty is their actions, their attitude, what they are about. So why on earth does the Torah need to tell us that Sarah was Yifat Toar, Rivka was Yifat Toar, Rachel was Yifat Toar? What's the problem? Why is this text sharing this information? So the commentators note that in the ideal world, the physical reflects the spiritual. In the ideal world, if someone has a good life and he has blessing, it is a sign that his soul is good as well. If he is beautiful, it is a sign that his soul is beautiful. Now, that's not the real world, by the way. The real world is not that. But this ideal world is more of a symbol. And therefore, and obviously it's an area that needs to be expanded on, but what the Torah is telling you is the following. The Kohen is a symbol. The Kohen is a symbol. He symbolizes the idea that really the physical world is supposed to reflect the spiritual. And in that ideal world, a blemished person, it is a sign that there is a problem there on the spiritual end. Therefore, the blemished Kohen is not to perform a service. Now, these are concepts that are difficult for us to walk away with because we live in a real world. But at least what I can take from this is a problem that a yeshiva student might walk away with. And here I have, and this is explanation number one, to why did this Rabbi Elazar, in our story in the Talmud in Ta'anit, why did he walk out of the study hall and see an ugly person and say, boy, you're a reka, you're an empty individual, you're ugly. What's wrong with him? I'll tell you what's wrong with him. He came out of an ideal world. And in the ideal world, we do talk about such concepts, that the physical reflects the spiritual. And therefore, due to the fact that he was still carrying an outlook of an ideal world, as he walked out to the real world, he made a very problematic statement because he saw someone ugly and he was still thinking like as if he's still in the Bet Midrash. And he said, you're ugly physically. Well, that's a sign that there's something flawed there on the spiritual end as well. So that's perhaps an explanation. What is, yes, relevant is the importance of realizing when a successful system of education, by the way, is one where the teachers understand that these students are going to one day walk out into a real world. And if you only give them the tools and the outlook of the ideal world, they might very well fail in the real world, right? I could refer to people I know, right, that studied in a yeshiva. And in the yeshiva, they talk about the fact that when you study Torah, God takes care of you, right? And you don't have to worry about the physical world because you are on a very high spiritual level that God takes care of you. But then this young man who eventually gets married and has a few children and has to support a family and goes out into the real world, that could be a very depressing real world because suddenly the manna is not falling And there's a problem when this ideal realm does not address the real realm. And this is something we've talked about in the past, that great rabbinic authorities did focus on this concept. This is not our main discussion today, but at least I gave you one insight into this idea of the real versus the ideal. Our main discussion today is going to be about what has been labeled, and this is going to be perhaps our title for the class, Ga'ava dikdusha, which you could translate as holy haughtiness. Holy haughtiness. Now, what does that mean? So first of all, it's a late term. It only probably made an appearance over the past 200 years, but there's a message there, and we're going to get back to it very soon. So what I want to do again is share with you something in Pareshat Emor and expand on it, and then develop an appreciation for what the Talmud is trying to communicate with that awful story of Rabbi Elazar insulting someone. He did tshuva, by the way. But nevertheless, it's a story that is one too difficult to read. Now, in Pareshat Emor, in chapter 22, the Torah shares with us the following. This is a little bit of a verse that is difficult to understand. So if you do have a Chumash, you could turn to chapter 22 and look at verse 1-2. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. Okay, that's verse number 1. Daber el Aharon. So Moshe is told to tell Aharon, ve'el banav, and to tell his children, the Kohanim as well, ve'inazru, and they should separate themselves, like a Nazir is separated. Here too, it is that they should separate themselves, mikotchei bnei Israel, from the holies of the children of Israel. They should separate themselves from the holies of the children of Israel. What does that mean? Kohanim are supposed to separate themselves from the holies of the children of Israel. What does that mean exactly? So Rashi explains that there are times that the Kohen, although the Israelites come to Jerusalem and offer them truma, and in some situations offer them basically meat because they get a portion of the meat that is offered on the Mizbeach, there are times that the Kohen has to realize that he has to separate himself. If he is impure, he should separate himself from that produce or from that meat. That's what Rashi tells us. Fine. However, there is a statement made by the Sforno, a commentator, 15th, 16th century. And he says the following. I'm going to read it to you in Hebrew because it's powerful, and I'll translate it. And he says the following, that shelo yachshevu, the Kohanim, lo yachshevu, shelegodel ma'alatam, due to the greatness of their status, yukotchei ha'am kechulim etzlam, that the holiness, or that which was designated as holy, should be considered insignificant or not holy for them. In other words, what Sforno is telling us is, imagine you are a Kohen. You are a Kohen. You know very well that there are those things that are holy, and you could only eat in a state of holiness if you are pure, and there are those things that are not. Suddenly, in Israel, a non-Kohen walks into your house, and he brings a basket of truma, and he said, "This is truma. I sanctified it as truma." Okay. So you say to yourself, "Okay, thank you very much." When the guy leaves, right? When this non-Kohen leaves, you say to yourself, this Amoritz, this guy, he knows nothing. He barely knows how to read Hebrew. I'm a Kohen, right? I am educated. In the past, the Kohanim were the educators. I am the one who has a background in Torah. I, due to my holiness and high status, I have the ability to make something holy. When I utter something that this is Truma, for example, or this is Kodesh, I have the ability to do so. But this Amoretz, this ignoramus, how on earth can a person like him, who knows so little, make something holy? So you might take his Truma, or that which he designated as holy, and say to yourself, this has no holiness. I can eat it in any state, because what the masses do has no significance. Holiness can only be the byproduct of someone like myself, someone on a high level. So the Torah warns the Kohen that you should know, V'inazru mikotche bnei Israel, shelo yachshavu. Don't think that, Kohen. Don't think that you're the only one that's holy, right? Don't think that you're the only one that could sanctify something, but even the Israel, even the one who, yes, might know less than you, but has the ability to sanctify. And when he utters that something is Kodesh, it is Kodesh. Remember that, Kohen, and that's the warning given the Kohanim. Separate yourself from that which has been labeled as holy, even if they are only Bnei Israel. Ve'inazru mikotche Bnei Israel. This is what this Forno says. Now, with that, let's go back to the story in the Talmud. And it is fundamental for us Jews and humans to value what we do. And it is so important. And it is something that I feel that it's unfortunate that maybe today it's different, but that when I grew up, this was not emphasized more. That when you do things, they have value, right? When you go ahead and study, may it be science and Kal Vachomer Torah, there's great value there. You are achieving something incredible. And it is important to have a little bit of that ga'ava, of that haughtiness, of kedusha. Value what you are doing. If you are in an industry that is helping society, right? If you deal with computers and you help people use technology, or if you deal with investments and you help people save, or if you deal with teeth and you help people have healthy gums and teeth when you were able to still practice your dentistry, you were doing something incredible. And you could go through the vast majority of jobs, and you have to realize they're doing incredible things. If you're running a casino, I don't know. But besides that, right, you are doing incredible things. And it is important to feel good about the fact you are making a contribution to the Yishuv HaOlam, to settling the world. And this is relevant to humanity. When humanity, right, when there is an individual there doing a good job in landscaping, he is fulfilling a mitzvah of Yishuv Olam. He's doing what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. This is what God wants, okay? And obviously, due to the fact that there was this pause, obviously it's an indication that we have to improve, because God wants the world to function. He wants things to operate. Yishuv Olam is important. Feel good about your contribution, and especially if you are a Torah Jew and you are doing it, to feed a Jewish family. It's so important to have a little bit of holy haughtiness. Now, that is extremely true for the yeshiva student, for one who is studying Torah, and studying Torah lishma, for the right reason. And he's understanding the depth of Torah, and then perhaps one day he could turn around and inspire others with the depth of what Torah is about. It is important to appreciate what you are doing and how significant it is. And that is most probably detail number one on the list of what would be expected from an educator. The educator should be expected, number one, to realize and appreciate how much of an impact he's having, and to be sure that he infuses this way of thinking into the student. You are doing something incredible, right? If it's in the workplace, right? Or if it's in the university, or if it's Kal Vachomer, if it's in the Beis Medrash, you are doing something incredible. Now, every generation needs to adjust these things. In other words, if you walk into a Beis Medrash where everyone already feels very good about themselves, that they are special, I don't know if this is an important message to preach because they're aware of it. For them, perhaps the message should be, yes, you are doing something incredible, but remember, other people are also doing good things. In other words, my grandfather, Rav Aaron Malevsky, studied in Slabotka Yeshiva, which we've discussed in the past. I was reading a little bit on Shabbos, sections of a book called The Making of a Gadol, which we've discussed in the past here. And in it, it noted, I probably read this in the past, I forgot, that Slabotka itself was a suburb of the city of Kovna. The actual name of the suburb was Williamspoli. The word Slabotka means suburb in Slavic. Okay, so this is just a piece of information that what Slabotka is about. Now, Slabotka Yeshiva emphasized what they called Gadluta Adam, the greatness of man. Meaning that was the message there. This was the theme, that humans should recognize that they're great, which is this idea. And it was very much a Slabotka idea. Unfortunately, I could just imagine a few of the graduates of that institution walking away with the idea of the greatness of man, not man as humanity, but the greatness of man. I'm a man, my greatness, right? There's that little bit, there's a danger there that when we talk about greatness, it's supposed to be we're all great, not that I am greater than you, but it's dangerous. It's something that's dangerous. When you say man, right? I think when was it? Armstrong landed on the moon, one small step for man, right? With the mankind. So it's important to remember that, yes, you have to feel good and have this ga'ava d'kedusha, but the Beis Medrash at times, if the student is not completely in tune with what it is all about, could walk away with too much ga'ava that's not holy. And this is what we are being told right here. The Torah is telling us in Pareshat Emor. Kohanim, you are making a tremendous contribution to the Jewish people. You are great. There's no question. The Kohen is a great man. You're working in the Bet HaMikdash. You are great. But remember, Kohen, do not allow this message of greatness to allow you to think that only you are great, because others are great as well. Don't look down at others because we emphasize on what you are achieving. Ve'inazru mikotche b'nei Israel, even that which is sanctified by the Jew who might not know what you know, even that which is sanctified by those who you call Amoretz, I'm sorry to say that has sanctity as well. And be careful, Cohen, with your attitude. Self-value, that's good. But when you value self, value others as well. And this is perhaps the area where we could look back at the story of Rabbi Elazar. He is coming from a Bet Midrash, which as mentioned was in Migdal Gedor, which was in a tower. A tower, what does a tower indicate? That you're high up, right? He was in a Migdal. That was the name of the town where this Rabbi Elazar, who labeled someone ugly, that's where it was in a Migdal. And it was also Gedor. There was a fence. In other words, he was not interacting enough. It is okay if the Bet Midrash has a fence to be sure that the student studies Torah and does not distract himself. But the fence should not allow him to forget that there are other people on the other side of the tracks or the fence. That's what we are being told here. And it is a problem that could exist that the Talmud is trying to convey. Yes, the Bet Midrash is important, and you are important for studying there, but remember there's importance to others as well. That's what we are being told. That's what we are being told here. You know, it is a problem that actually existed. Okay, so David wants to know, wait a second, is there really a place called Migdal Gedor? So I think it's the Maharal that says the following. Migdal Gedor was not a well-known yeshiva. In other words, yes, there is a place called Migdal. It is in northern Israel. If you're the Kavena Ameil by the name of Mary, who came from there, Mary Magdalene, came from Migdol. So there is a place called Migdol. But the fact that the Talmud focuses on the name, the fact that they focus on the name is because the name was the problem. That this was a person that was on the ivory tower and fenced out from the world, you develop this feeling of greatness, and that could be a little bit of a problem that exists. My father, I don't know if I should record this or even share this, but I'll share it with you anyway. So my father arrived in Baltimore Yeshiva at age 16. He graduated high school in Uruguay in January of 1958. He was 16. And why did he graduate in January? Because it's South America, right? And you graduate in the summer. So my grandfather put him on a plane and he sent him off to North America to a yeshiva. There was a question what yeshiva to send him. There's an interesting story there for some other time as well. But my father would share with me the following, that he arrived in Baltimore not knowing a word of English. And I met years later someone who told me that I was the person who taught your father a very important word in English. I said, which one? He said to me, free. I said, oh yeah, how do you? He said that there was a sign in their Israel yeshiva that said free library. So my father knew what library is, but he didn't know what was meant free. So he would interact with the students who knew Yiddish, and that's how he picked up his English. What my father did do was that he would buy the New York Times and sat with a dictionary, and that's how he learned English. Eventually he was lecturing in English, obviously with the South American accent, but he picked up the English language. So he shared the following, that he, as someone not really familiar with the yeshiva, coming from Montevideo from public school, so he noticed that he would tune into conversations of people in the yeshiva, and they would sometimes, in the yeshiva language, be mevatel balabatim. What does it mean to be mevatel? In other words, they would share something that someone from the outside would say, a balabos, a non-member of the yeshiva community. They would say, hey, he's a balabos, right? It's not, in other words, we don't have to take what he has to say into consideration so much because he's a balabos. So the balabos, unfortunately, for my father at least, he sensed that there was some kind of negative connotation there when they would mention it. One day, a person walks into the Beis Medrash, and he sees that the Rabbeim jump up, the Rosh Hashiva jumps up to welcome him. And my father asks, who is this person? They say, what do you mean it's a balabos? In other words, it's someone that is a balabos. We have to honor him. So the point of the story is that there's an awareness that the Talmud wants us to have. Yes, you have achieved greatness in Torah, and yes, you are in many ways the savior of our tradition, because without the yeshivot and without the study of Torah, we would not have a future. But remember to respect the people on the outside. Don't let your ga'ava to go from kedusha to unkosher ga'ava. There's a story I found that relates to Chidushei Harim. Chidushei Harim, there are members in the community here that have roots in Ger Hasidic communities. And the Chidushei Harim, right? I think Rabbi Yisrael Meir was his name. He was the grandfather of the Sfas Emes. So he was perhaps the first of the Ger Rebbes. So this is taking place in the middle of the 19th century, that he welcomed into his house two great non-Hasidic authorities. He welcomed them. But the Ger Rebbe, who was a righteous person, and he sensed that there's a flaw that exists in some communities, that people who indeed have great knowledge of Torah and a great appreciation for Torah are nevertheless lacking the sensitivity to the value they are supposed to have to the rest of Klal Yisrael. So the Rebbe wanted to get this message across to these two Torah scholars that walked in, that yes, you might be beautiful and you might be incredible, but remember that your respect towards others is important. So the Ger Rebbe asked these two guests a question. Obviously, he welcomed them, he schmoozed with them and learning. And he said to them, there are many musical instruments that appear in Tehillim. It will be interesting once to study it, right? What were the musical instruments that King David was familiar with? One of them was the harp. The harp. Different types of harps existed. The harp that is referred to often in Tehillim is called a naval, nevel v'chinor, nevel, right? Nevel, nun, bet, lamed. So, ask the Chidush Arim, do you people know why it's called, why is the harp called a nevel? So the Torah scholars were familiar with a statement made in the Jerusalem Talmud. The Jerusalem Talmud tells us that you should know that the nevel, the harp, created such magnificent sounds that it made the other musical instruments sound unpleasant. Now, the word nevel in Hebrew, when you say Adam menuval, someone that is like disgraceful or despicable. A despicable individual is a naval, right? Or a deplorable. I don't know if you remember in 2016, deplorables. So someone that's deplorable, despicable. So the Ger Rebbe asked them, why do they call a musical instrument a naval, one who makes others despicable? So they noted that the Talmud tells us that due to the beautiful sound created by the naval, all other instruments seemed unpleasant. In the words of the Talmud, minabelet kelim acherim. It causes others to be unpleasant or undesirable. But the Ger Rebbe asked him, but wait a second. Why give it, true, you have shared with me that statement of the Talmud, but why give it such an ugly name if it has such beauty? If you're telling me that this naval creates the most beautiful of sounds, why does it have an ugly name? In other words, you could have called it something else. Why focus specifically on the fact that it makes the other musical instruments not look good? So they didn't have an answer. So the Chidush Harim, the Rebbe said to them the following: you should know that it is nice to create a great sound. However, if you cause others to look not good, there is something flawed within you. This naval, yes, it's beautiful, but since it has this nature of when it is used to bring out the flaw or the lack of beauty by the others, that indicates a flaw in the harp. That indicates a flaw in the naval. It is called a naval. It is called one who is despicable, right, or undesirable, because that's what it does. It causes others to have the tendency of flaw. In other words, what he's really telling them, you could be a great Torah scholar, no question about it. You could be knowledgeable in statements in the Jerusalem Talmud that others don't know. But if your whole identity is that you go ahead and compare yourself or cause others to not be pleasant, that's a flaw. That is why we give a name that's not the nicest of names to this beautiful instrument, because it brings out the flaw in others. Judaism is about, yes, appreciating what you are, but at the same time appreciating everyone else, right? And we do know when you interact with judgmental people, there's something unpleasant there. When someone deep down looks down at you, you're going to sense it. And there's not going to be a closeness if they consider you as less than them. If on the other end you interact with someone that, yes, is extremely great and righteous and knowledgeable, but sees the value in everyone, those are the ones that are going to inspire. That's what the Chidush Harim noted. And that's a message that obviously is appearing in Pareshat Emor, and it gives us a little bit of an understanding of this flaw that Rabbi Elazar had. Bottom line is Rabbi Elazar did do tshuva, and the real world taught him a lesson, that we as Jews appreciate what everyone, the contribution of everyone, and it's a message that's relevant at all times, that Jews and humanity, it's important to remember that as well, but especially us, Bnei Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, what we do as value, and especially if you think about someone that davens and studies Torah with all that is taking place around us, obviously something to value yourself. That's perhaps a message, but value your neighbor, value others as well. David Wolf did some research, and he noted that the Migdal mentioned, which is north of Tveria, is next to the Roberg restaurant, which we visited in February of 2011. So maybe this Rabbi Elazar interacted with the chef of Roberg, who was there 1,800 years ago, perhaps. But nevertheless, what's relevant, I think it closes by now, right? Roberg is closed. Anyway, Rabbi Isai, this is our message today. I thank you for participating. I would like to remind you that tomorrow morning we have a scheduled class at 10:15 with a person I have a tremendous amount of respect for. I know Rabbi Cooperman from decades ago. He's a very, very wise individual. He has as a posek and as a person, as a therapist, and I believe that there's a lot to gain. He's a rabbi in Leeds, so I would highly recommend that you try to participate tomorrow at 10:15. We'll send the link out again, but it's an opportunity to hear a different angle, and always good to learn from others.